the amount of times that people will come to me from, other practitioners that have gotten that message, because it makes sense. It makes sense to offload the tissue. This is hurting me, so I'm gonna stop doing that because the movement is bad for me. When, like we said before, there's so many different modifications. There's ways that we can adjust the weight, the range of motion, maybe even the tempo that you're doing things. And basically, you wanna modify. You never eliminate unless you really have to, because there are some movements that it's like, hey, there's just not enough juice for the squeeze. Let's put this in the red light category. This is like a no-go. And then hopefully as we start rehabbing you, the red lights become yellow lights, the sore but safe, and then the yellow lights become green lights. That's the process.
Let's link up with Krysta on the Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey there, Fix listeners. Welcome back to our latest episode of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and today I am joined by one fantastic guest who, interestingly, has quite a unique first name, and yet he is the second guest on my show to have it, which is really cool. So you'll hear us talk about right in the first few minutes of the episode, and that is Dr. Dane. He is also known as Chiro by the Sea on Instagram. He is a chiropractor serving the Jersey Shore area between Monmouth, Ocean counties. I know there's lots of you out there who listen to this show that are based there. So I say all of that to preface this conversation with, if some of it resonates with you, and I'm positive it will, if you are out there and you're dealing with any kind of pain, you're somebody who feels like they've gotten away from the things that they enjoy doing around movement, reach out to Dane, because he has a perspective, a unique approach to chiropractics, and how he delineates it as a profession that will really help you understand, and you'll hear me describe why his approach really aligns with the stance that I take on nutrition and fitness. So I really loved this one, filled with lots of analogies. We talked some fun stuff about coffee in the beginning, as we always do. And I'm just really proud to be able to share this episode, and also say that I have been collaborating with Dane over the past month or so to work on his social media content. And I'm really, really excited to give him this platform to be able to talk in even more detail about what he does and who he serves, and just bring more of this great education and amazing practitioners and amazing professionals, not just in the health and wellness space, but in any areas of your life that may require support, coaching, whatever, through the podcast. So what you can expect over the next few months is a chance for me to not only bring on nutrition clients and talk about my experience as a nutrition coach, but also get to highlight and showcase my clients who are working with me as fellow business owners, looking to get even more streamlined and get more connected with those of you out there through their content via social media. So with that, let's welcome Dr. Dane to the Fix podcast. Dane, welcome to the Fix podcast. I'm stoked to have you. I didn't tell you this before we hit record, but you are number 2 for people named Dane on my show. And I feel like that's very unique because it's not that common of a name, which is very cool. So you got some shoes to fill, because the last guest I had named Dane was also a great guest. But my brother's named Dane too. So you're one of 3 Danes I know in my life. And I feel like that's got to mean something, right? Like, it is a very unique name, I think.
Very uncommon. I'm actually surprised that it's not like the first one. Like, I've never actually met another Dane in my entire life. Like, stranger on the street, like, hey man, like, what's your name? And I've never had Dane just said back to me. So
Yeah.
It's actually amazing to me that I'm like number 3 on that list.
I know. I feel like, I don't know what that says about me, especially because one of them's my own sibling. So like, obviously I'm stuck with him, but we're going to change that reality for you, and I'll introduce you guys sometime. So then you'll be able to know at least one other Dane.
We'll make a Dane group chat. That sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, awesome. Well, like I mentioned, keep the intro to the episode nice and light. I'm a big coffee drinker. I love me some coffee, love all the local coffee shops down in the Jersey Shore area. And I'm sure we're going to talk all things Jersey Shore in this episode for sure. But are you a coffee drinker? And if so, what are you sipping on in the morning to get your day started?
And we are asking the hard-hitting questions to get the pod started. This might be the most important thing we talk about. Forget rehab and training. It might be this.
Agree. I'm really glad you agree on that.
Jersey Shore coffee, I'm addicted, but my answer is so friggin' basic. It depends. Like at
Okay.
home, I'm really just a black hot coffee drinker, but when I'm out, I feel like if you cut me open, I feel like I'd bleed out like black cold brew. Like I feel like that is my obsession. Like I've been
Uh,
hooked on offshore down in Belmar,
nice. Okay.
and they're actually opening up in Convention Hall now,
I
from what I hear,
heard. So they're going to be your neighbors.
literally right down the street. So the
Perfect.
addiction is going to be fueled 10x. So I'm just getting myself mentally prepared for that.
Yes. Well, when I lived in Long Branch, I hung out at offshore often. It tended to be my office many days, and I've met many clients there. So it's a fan favorite. And I do have to shout out one of my other favorite brands, who is my best friend. So I'm partial and biased. But if you ever venture down a little further south and go to the Seager area, you can check out Shorepore, which is run by my amazing, amazing friend, Nikki. And she's been there for like 5 years already, almost six, which is pretty wild. But her coffee's really good.
I'll have to check it out. I'm already taking notes.
Yeah, very good cold brew. So she's a good one to put into the mix too. But I'm glad you're a cold brew drinker. The listeners know, will drink iced coffee no matter the temperature outside. So I don't know if you're like that too, but I do not deviate. Like if it's the winter, like today, 20 something degrees, there's still ice in that coffee, no question.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. I don't know why. I have a theory. I haven't mentioned this on the show in a while, but I've talked to other trainers about this. I think it's like a trainer thing that happens out of necessity because if you spend a lot of time in any industries like ours where you're seeing a lot of clients back to back or like teaching classes or in your case working with patients, I just always kind of found it easier waking up at 4 in the morning. I'm not brewing coffee. Like I don't have time. I got to get out the door. So that's what kind of started my iced coffee addiction, I think.
Yeah, I think it's just the nature of the beast, the nature of the
Yeah.
schedule and everything like that.
We got to be efficient, right? So
Yeah.
cool. Love it. Glad we already have some things in common, which I expected us to. But that said, we are moving in the direction of the much deeper and really meaningful part of the conversation. Not that we don't love coffee, but whenever I have a guest on the show, I like to take sort of a different angle. Yes, we want to hear about who you are, your qualifications, your resume, all of the things that make you the practitioner that you are in and your journey through chiropractic. But I want to understand at a deeper level. If somebody were to ask you, like, who is Dane at his core and why should we care about your take on the rest of this podcast episode? What would you say?
Damn, that's a very good question. You
I
you
always get the
really you got the
best
openers
answers.
here.
I get the
Yeah.
best answers from this. Like, I'll never deviate from this question because I have had some of the most amazing responses to this, especially because I didn't give you time to prep it. And I've never mentioned that to the listener. So I should tell you guys this. I never ask this question in advance, it's always off the cuff. And what's cool about it and why I stick to it, this response informs the rest of the conversation because I'm not really sure what you're going to say. And when you kind of give me that like deeper meaning of why you do what you do, that opens us up to have a very different perspective on the actual, components of being in this field and why you got into it and your whole part of your story. So it's a fun one. So with
I
that,
love it.
I'll let you
We get a
take the floor.
little
Go ahead.
inside scoop on the FYX
Yes.
podcast here. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess in my profession, like at my core, like I'm just someone that really never wants to stop learning. Like I really try to encompass a growth mindset in an industry that there's just a lot of misunderstanding and
Mm,
misconceptions about what we do within health and fitness, chiropractic specifically.
sure.
So, I got into clinical practice realizing very fast that I did not have all the answers that I thought I did when I was a student.
Mm,
And, early cases, patient encounters, like things just don't go as planned. So I really like sometimes to a fault will always try to say, okay, if I had an interaction that didn't really go the way that I planned, you know, especially in the beginning, what course can I take to really try to level up my skills? What's the next book that I could read? What's the next, you know, mentorship that I could take in terms of like really trying to level up my skills. And I think that in my profession, a big issue that we can definitely dive into is people really get into the profession feeling kind of like how I did first out of school, where nope,
right.
I've got the degree. I'm kind of, I'm head honcho, like, I'm Dr. Dane, like I could take on the world, right? And it's really like, I think a lot of people don't understand that's just the beginning of it. Like that's really the walking across stage, it's a huge accomplishment, but it's really just the beginning of that learning journey. Um, at least in my opinion. So for me, like, a lot of people in my profession, they might stick to one model or one system that they try to utilize. And the issue with that is that you have a framework that you can apply to certain cases, and you might get good results, 7, 8 out of 10, times working with people. But what happens for the three or two that don't
It
really pan
doesn't.
out? So
Mhm.
really, I've tried to take more of a principles approach in terms of my patient care, and really try to make my care more patient centered. And I'm not trying to force a patient into my, method or system. Really trying to see what's best for the person in front of me, and how can I try to meet their goals in a way that works best for them.
Yeah, love it. I mean, there are so many parallels, of course, to the nutrition aspect of what you just said. And coincidentally, a similar take came up when I interviewed one of our other mutual friends, Mike Bruno. And he and I spoke about this at length because he really said similarly to you, just like you can't force people into a certain box, right? You just can't. You have to think about this from the perspective of how can I ask the open-ended questions? How can I really, for me, the language I use inside of the Fitness Fix, meet this person where they are, but then pull them up to where they need to be, because that is a requirement of getting them the results that they do desire. However, it needs to fit within their lifestyle, not cause this like, hey, I need you to do a total 180 and I need you to do it by next week, right? So for you, I'd love for you to just kind of start with this whole idea of your shift in perspective. Take me back to when you really were first starting, like actually seeing patients. Do you have like either an anecdote or just like something that kind of sticks out in your mind of a time when you were like, oh, I went into this with one expectation of the best way to treat this person or what might have even possibly been wrong, quote unquote, with them. And then you found out very different information or ultimately went about it a really different way. Cause I think that's something that is just a reminder for anyone that there are multiple paths, there are multiple options, and being really open minded applies to just about any area of your life.
100%. I could even rewind even further back to
Sure.
my
If
personal
from your
training
own
days.
experience, yeah, go for
Yeah.
it. Wherever you want to
So,
start.
and I'm unsure if we talked about this on our initial calls, but I used to work in boutique fitness as a personal trainer,
I don't
doing
think
more
we did actually.
one-on-ones. I never did any group classes, but I was doing more one-on-one in boutique fitness, and that was really where I first got my feet wet with
Okay.
one-on-one interactions,
Cool.
and it kind of fueled me to pursue something, within a graduate program. This is after I
Hmm.
graduated undergrad,
Okay.
and I took a gap year. So I kind of wanted to blend. I had been into healthcare and human movement and the idea of helping people
Hmm.
for a long time, and I shadowed chiropractors in my last year of college. So I kind of had the idea already in there. I really didn't, send any applications until after the gap year was done, but I attribute that boutique fitness experience to the first like one-on-one experience that I think I was craving in chiropractic. Um, and what I liked about chiropractic in general is that we have a very wide scope of practice. Our scope allows us to do not just hands-on care, but more of the rehabilitation and exercise, and people that even get into different niches with nutrition-based, therapies and everything like that, and consultations. So basically, I really expected to, or I guess my want was to really blend the two together in terms of health and fitness and just healthcare and chiropractic.
Hmm.
Um, got to chiropractic school, realized it was a very different place. Like it was very
Sure.
different from what I expected. Um, like I said, a lot of outdated narratives. I didn't realize a lot of this until later on, until I was close to graduating, and honestly, even in my rotations as a student. And it was a weird time because COVID had it came on about
Sure.
halfway through, so you kind of at some points like put your head down and say, all right, I just got to get to graduation and really get to my clinical reps, and then I'll kind of figure it out from there.
Totally.
But I realized very fast that, like we said before, they in chiropractic school you get pitched more of like kind of like a one size fits all approach to some patient encounters, and it's
Hmm.
just not the way that at least our branch of medicine works, right? So we get taught in chiropractic school, depending on what chiropractic school you go to, some are a little bit more outdated, and some are a little bit more evidence based. And luckily, my school was up in New York, but we were very based on, hands-on care, manual therapy, and I just wasn't really aligning with the knowledge and with the narrative of, okay, the patient comes in, they have XYZ, we're going to adjust, and really there's not a comprehensive plan around that.
Right.
And so really what I was starting to see was that, whether it's in school or in clinical practice, like getting out of school, that a lot of what we see in the traditional model is more of a dependency. So, somebody gets hurt, somebody's looking for, relief because their back hurts and they're not able to, play with their grandkids. Um, you know, really in the traditional model, we're really just applying the hands-on care, but we're not doing any additional lifestyle modifications or exercise. That became more of a rarity in terms of the insurance model and in terms of the
Mhm.
traditional model when I came out of school. So really, I saw the limitations when I came out in terms of, you know, some of it is business, some of it is just clinical philosophy and just like not being exposed to what we can really do for people. But that was really the crossroad for me, where it was like, well, I really want to treat people in a more comprehensive way. But I realized very fast that insurance didn't really dictate that. I guess I should say insurance was dictating too much of what we do.
Mhm.
And then essentially, we really need to kind of imagine things in our model differently in order to provide that comprehensive care we're looking to do, which is why I've gone into more of a hybrid model, which we can dive into, of a combination of in-person hands-on care and exercise, as well as some digital support as well.
Yeah. You said the word dependency, and I was thinking about asking you this question because although I have had chiropractors on the show before, I've never thought to ask this. And I think it's an important one to just kind of unpack a little bit more. To me, as a consumer, right, or on like the patient side of receiving chiropractic care, because I have many times, I think that there has been like a long time stigma with it for that word, right? Because there was a model where it was, and sometimes even the combination of nutrition too. And like I can kind of like hit that one because I've had clients come to me and be like, yeah, I was working with this chiropractor who claims to be a nutritionist and I'm having this gut health issue. So then they gave me all these supplements and I'm like, that like gives me a little bit of pause because the story that's been perpetuated that I think is partially unfair, but I want you to respond to, right? Is well, part of the reason why the chiropractor is pushing you a supplement has to do with their business model for them to potentially be able to make more money. And let's just face it, it doesn't matter the industry that you're in. There will always be people, there will always be someone who is in the business for that purpose. And we can't say that like one bad apple is the reason to just paint these broad brushstrokes, right? But you kind of hinted at it in saying that you were able to identify some of these issues, particularly around this idea of saying, hey, like we can do more for the patient besides this one adjustment that they come once a week, then every other week, then once a month. And hopefully in that time they tell you they feel better. But then what actually happens? 6 months go by. They don't come see you as frequently. They convince themselves that they don't need to spend the money on something. Or there is the other side of it where like people have this like wanting to kind of like push chiropractics away because they're like, oh, they tried to put me on this plan and have that like negative connotation with that. So talk me through where you land on that, because it sounds like you, as you said, were at a crossroads that you kind of hit this like intersection of maybe where the industry was shifting. And interestingly, as I think through this, like most of the chiropractors that I know are really young, like relative to the amount of school it takes, and have only entered the field more recently, like within the last like 5 to 10 years. And maybe the one other one that I know who actually was a mentor to Mike was somebody who had a very interesting background, had like a blend of both chiropractics and physical therapy. And for that reason, she adjusted her approach to chiropractics and kind of like carved something really unique for herself. And I think that's the path that you're on too.
Yeah, I'll initially say that I do believe that there are a lot of well-intentioned physical therapists and chiropractors that practice in the traditional model,
Mm-hmm.
especially in an older generation,
Sure.
that's just what
That's
they
what
were
they know.
exposed to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same way we can't
They,
blame doctors for like not knowing enough about nutrition, right? Like that's a
yeah.
gripe I have all the time. And some of my clients where I struggle is they're like, well, my doctor said this. And then I have to remind them like, hey, they said that, but they only got 15 minutes of nutrition in med school. So whose opinion, like we could take this into consideration of the game plan, but can we also consider, XYZ over here?
Yeah, no, of course. And it's tough because, you know, as a younger chiropractor, you kind of get met like with a lot of adversity in terms of challenging the traditional model, even if,
Of course.
and I'm very passionate about it. A lot of people that are in my circle, in my echo chamber are very passionate about it. And it's good to have that community to really bounce ideas off of and just sometimes get reassurance that no, like what we're trying to provide in patient-centered care is really what's best for the patient, even if it kind of it falls in the face of adversity, right? So
Sure.
there's really like still like you mentioned that stigma about what chiropractic is, and a lot of people will still relate chiropractic as only being the hands-on care. And there's even some people that get surprised when I told them that I even provide exercise rehabilitation because they
Yeah,
kind of
that's so
assume
interesting.
because it's really a lot of people, it depends on your chiropractic experience.
Right.
And going back to my point about the wide scope of practice, like
Mhm.
I that attracted me to the profession because I really
That's cool.
thought because of my boutique fitness experience combined with what I was trying to do on the healthcare side with
Yeah.
hands-on care and administering exercise from more of a rehab perspective, you know, I saw it as being able to make something my own, which is true. And in the same token, the downfall of it is that you can go to 10 different chiropractors and you're going to get 10 completely different experiences. And
Right.
people will sometimes, and this goes for physical therapy as well. Some people come to
Totally.
me and they come from a really bad physical therapy experience and they relate their maybe one and only experience with physical therapy as physical therapy didn't work for me or chiropractic didn't work for me. Whereas chiropractic is not a it's not a therapy, it's not a modality, it's a profession. So there's really you can really in terms of today's day and age in chiropractic, you can really, be an informed consumer and really test out different options and see what works best for you because not every style is going to work for them. So it definitely is. It's an uphill climb. I'll say that in terms of trying to go against the grain.
Yeah.
But there's definitely more and more providers that are pushing towards this model now in terms of something that, is maybe more hybrid. Maybe they are in person, but they're just doing longer sessions with people.
Hmm.
Some people they lean more to the virtual side in terms of just doing rehabilitation. So the beauty of it is that you can make it your own. But we're definitely in a time period right now where it's very fresh and things are really new and it's exciting.
Very.
And it's just really trying to put the patient first.
Yeah. It is interesting the point that you just made about it being such like a broad modality. And I think, quote from this episode has to be what you just said about it being a profession and that distinction, right? Because even to give you a personal example, just the other day, I met a group of women who only specialize in pediatric chiropractic, and that's all they do. And I knew I knew a little bit about their practice, but I actually had no idea that that was their only focus. And I totally understand why, right? Because that can be that specialized, and that's amazing because they obviously if they work in that environment, they feel very passionate about that population. It's a population that how cool to serve someone as little as an infant because you're then impacting realistically their movement as an adult, right? You have the capacity to do that. I think that's fantastic. So, all that to say, I think this is the perfect segue for you to kind of talk through what you referenced and something you and I have discussed outside of this podcast as more of this hybrid approach and how you're formulating that and what you see is a real benefit for the patients that you work with. Because truthfully, I'm biased towards the fact that I have had similar background to you of like teaching group fitness, being in the boutique space, and then having my own shift and like kind of change of heart during COVID, where I was like, I don't know if I want to stay in this industry because in the initial first 2 to 3 months of gyms being closed, we know what happened. So many people were like, get on Zoom and go do workouts. The thought of that legitimately pained me. I hated the idea of like being stationary like this and sitting there and possibly coaching someone. It just took away from the experience for me because I am so extroverted that I felt like I was missing on the energy, especially of having a lot of people in one room. And that component of like putting on the show, so to speak, and like getting them to all feed off of each other is so hard to do through the computer. It was also really fresh. We were also trying to be reactive and adapt and figure it out. But that's ultimately what landed me down the path of like really honing in on nutrition because one, it is so important. And truthfully, I would argue even sometimes more important because it does represent the other 23 hours of your day outside of what's going on in the gym, especially inside of the fitness fix. We look at stress management, we look at sleep, we look at how you're moving your body. Like it's not just saying, hey, here are the macros to eat and here's the food that you need. So for most of my clients who I met through the group fitness world, I actually realized I could help them more because it wasn't that they really needed help with their workouts, so to speak. They needed help figuring out what the hell was the missing piece because they were in the gym 5 days a week. So where's the disconnect? They were on Zoom during COVID taking, the virtual classes. So where's the disconnect? And I love filling that gap. But I really do believe that the best sweet spot is that mix of in person. And that's why I love like any chance I get, if my client is local, I'll totally go meet them for coffee. It's just a great way to connect. It's such a good way to really get to understand them on a level that sometimes I'll be the first to say it. I talked to my clients about this yesterday, and I'm actually doing a presentation on it tonight after this call. That sometimes some of the advice that I give them can get a little bit misconstrued or taken out of context because it's being sent through a message, whether that's a voice note or a video I record for them, or even like me typing something to them. And it helps me be a better coach because I realize that I need to think very carefully about the questions I'm posing and the word choice that I'm using. But it's also given me this like crazy education in psychology and figuring out what triggers people and what causes them to react a certain way. So again, sweet spot to me is like getting the opportunity to see them in person, but also then having this continuity in your case of care that can happen virtually. So all that to say, talk me through how you kind of came to that sweet spot for yourself. Was it similar? Was it just through the experiences you had when you first started out in chiropractic, like after college, and looking to blend the boutique fitness background into it, and then bring us up to speed with where you are right now and the way your business works?
Yeah, you nailed it when it comes to really trying to create continuous care in terms of really trying to, whether it's lifestyle modifications, whether it's just an exercise program. I might butcher this stat totally, but I think I
All
read
good.
somewhere that if you go to traditional chiro or PT 3 times a week and have a 1 hour session, which is probably more than what you would get anyway in terms
Oh,
of
totally. I
traditional
would say it's
healthcare.
like 3 times as much.
Exactly. Even that alone is, I think they calculated like 1% of somebody's week. So really, when it comes to the continuous care, it's really more about trying to not have that dependency like we talked about before with the hands-on care because, and I think hands-on care is great. A lot of people will listen to me or other providers in this model and think that I'm like poo-pooing the adjustment and that, the chiropractic, the hands-on therapy doesn't matter.
I love a
Um,
good adjustment. You just feel better after
who
too.
doesn't,
Get
right?
some stim. It's all good.
Exactly. And it really, there's more context that's needed for a lot of those
Mhm.
scenarios. Some people,
Sure.
they might really value that. Some people, they might not value it as much. They want somebody to look at the way that they move. And this is something that I really enjoy because you can really, I can have a hybrid model, but I can really match it to the specific person in front of
Of what
me.
they need. Yeah.
Somebody might live a little farther away from me. They might be drivable to the Jersey Shore, but if distance is a factor, and also in my clinical judgment, I feel that they don't really need as many in-person sessions. We
Mhm.
can completely space those out because the honest truth is, and this is going to be a hot take for most chiropractors, people do not need to be in person seeing a chiropractor or a PT 3 days a week. Anything other than once or twice a week for a majority of cases is really it's just more of the traditional model, and you see it in those mill type clinics. So essentially we try to decrease the frequency of the in-person visits while we're trying to give them digital support on the side. And that might look very, very different for a lot of people. For some people, they might want the accountability of having a full personalized exercise program, the full rehab, their training. They might want to give you like complete reign to like what they do for the week on an exercise standpoint. Something I really, really prioritize when I'm consulting with somebody is I try to see where are the other stakeholders in their lives. Where, do you have a trainer already? Do you have a coach? Do you have somebody that's within your realm that's really giving you a lot of advice that you really admire? I never want to be the practitioner that says unless it's really indicated, I think
Yeah.
that somebody is maybe not in the right program, or maybe there's something that we can change about,
Mhm.
certain things, little nuances. But, I never want to step on any toes if I don't have to in terms of other providers or other coaches. So for some people, it might just be little mobility drills during the week. So you can really personalize it to the person, and their unique needs in terms of what does that digital support look like. And the common misconception is that, we're going to get on Zoom synchronously and I'm going to watch you like do air squats at home. Like it's really more about keeping you accountable during the week, but also having access to me. And I think that's such a crucial component of the new hybrid model is having the asynchronous support of me,
Mhm.
where picture you're at a traditional chiro, traditional PT, and I give you an exercise to do on a Friday, and it's a new exercise. I think it's really going to benefit you. And when it comes to exercise and dosing, and that's a whole other hour conversation.
Yeah.
There's really no way, unfortunately, to predict how somebody's going to respond. Same thing in the nutrition world, right? You
Right.
have to just dose it, see what the response is, and then we just kind of readjust,
Yeah.
kind of like
We
you're
have to
turning dials.
acknowledge. Yeah. You have to acknowledge like it's an experimentation to a degree. Like I can look at a person and have a really good idea of what the best macros are for them. But the really important driver of that is what is their behavior? Because I tell everybody I talk to, even if they don't become a client of mine, like the one piece of advice I'll leave somebody with on a sales call if they decide it's not the right time, they're not a fit, whatever. I always tell them, I am happy to literally hand you macros right now. You tell me how much you weigh, you tell me what your goals are, and you tell me what kind of timelines you set for it. I'll tell you what macros to follow, but there's a big gap. I have no idea your ability through maybe a lack of education to actually be compliant with those numbers and know how to hit them. And that is the only thing that matters. So, truthfully, when I think about nutrition, half the time, what I'm really teaching people is better time management and strategizing by planning in advance and not being so emotional. And that doesn't mean that our emotions are bad, but not being so emotional in the sense that can we be less reactive and more responsive, which goes along with planning. But it's like, I get on Instagram, I did a story about this before we jumped on the pod. And I said, like, if you're struggling with the concept of macros, we really need to talk about emotions and time. Nobody wants that in their marketing. Like they don't, but that's actually what they need to hear. So, anyways, keep going, but I'm in total agreement with you.
No, 100%. And, as it relates to the digital support side, like I
Mhm.
think something that's powerful about, and just both of our models,
Yeah.
having some sort of digital support is, let's say, going back to the traditional model, you see me on a Friday, you might not be seeing me until, let's say, the following Wednesday. You're coming
Yeah.
in twice a
I could
week.
forget that exercise real quick. Like that was
Right.
my experience so much with having, not the best PT experience sometimes. I remember like the one chiropractor that I was referencing earlier who really helped me to the point where she also like worked with half of our swim team in high school and we were all seeing her like we all had KT tape on our back at the same time. And she really helped us a lot. And I remember she gave me printouts of the exercises. And even to think like this was obviously back in like 2010. So, 15 years ago, the technology has continued to speed up. But to think that like at the time, her giving me a PDF with like these little like frames of like each step of the movement. Whereas now we have apps, we can record videos, we can send those videos, we can push them to you in the form of the app. Like that in and of itself in the last 15 years is such a game changer, right? but I remember the difference that actually made for me in the long run of getting out of what I was experiencing at the time was a lot of shoulder pain. And as a swimmer, it just kept getting exacerbated every time I got into the pool because it's such a monotonous exercise, right? Like
Hmm.
people think about swimming and they're like, oh, well, like it's not as much resistance. Well, it is in the sense that you're moving water, right? Yes, it's low impact, but that's not without limitations and range of motion issues that then affect your stroke and therefore your efficiency in the water, which will impact your time. And if this whole sport is around time, then we want to be as efficient as possible in the pool, right? But to go back to her as the example, it was like such a big difference maker for her to hand me that sheet of paper and be like, this is what you're going to do and write it down for me. Because I had had experiences before that when crazy to think like you're only 14 years old. Are you really going to remember to do those things? No, like that should be the bare minimum in a way.
There's no accountability when it comes
Yeah,
to
none.
handing a sheet to somebody, and the compliance rate
Right.
of just getting that PDF or that sheet,
The
which still,
compliance was my mom being like, I'm
yeah,
paying for this. So please make
yeah, you
sure
better do
you
it.
do it.
You better do it. You
Yeah.
better get better.
Let's be
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
And how it's changed now is that, let's say you go home on the weekend after the exercise I gave you, and now the exercise hurts. There's a little bit of pain. Now,
Sure.
in the new model, you could message me and say, hey, the new squats you gave me, I'm having a little bit of pain with it. I'm having a flare up. We could
Mm.
troubleshoot that on the
Right
spot.
now. Yeah.
We could troubleshoot it over
So true.
DM, and you could, instead of not doing the movement, which most people would do in that state, okay, it's hurting.
Yep.
I'm probably gonna stop, and then maybe you're sedentary until next Wednesday, and then we have, obviously, the snowball effect that can happen with that, rather than if we can workshop those things in real time outside of the clinic. I might give you a modification for the squat that makes it feel okay. So you're able to at least continue through the weekend and until the next time you see me in person. So that's the power of adding apps and adding the digital support in that asynchronous model. So that's, to me, that's going to be the future of most providers, whether it's chiros, PTs, really, really any healthcare professionals.
Yeah. Look at I mean, just telemedicine as a whole, right? Like and those are the things that I do think are so fantastic about the forced pivots that we've had to have in the last 5 years. I have had a number of guests on this podcast who are in the telemedicine space from multiple angles. I've had virtual therapists on the show, like for couples therapy. I've had companies that come to your house and literally send a phlebotomist and do the blood draw for you and then put it through their, proprietary system of certain targets they're looking for and helping you optimize yourself like from a longevity perspective. I have had virtual telemedicine come on the show talking about hormone therapies and the access to that. Like it's actually really amazing that we have access to these things, but and this could probably be a whole other, 20-minute riff, but I think it's worth asking right here is then it comes down to utilization. People feeling like maybe they have too many options or people feeling confused because there is conflicting information. Who's the best? What's right for me? Obviously, this goes back to what you addressed at the very beginning. Meeting this person where they are, hearing them, asking them what they really need help with, and maybe even showing them what they do need help with because they might not know. When you get a person who's in pain in particular, right? Like all they want is to get out of pain. And they're coming to you because they're like, I don't know how to get out of this pain because if I did, I would have figured it out already. Right. So talk me through your take on that, whether this is from like things that you and I have discussed from a marketing perspective, things that you could consider from like how you're partnering. I know a big goal for you is to partner locally with gyms and other businesses that align with your perspective just in the area between Monmouth County, Ocean County, et cetera. Because I think, in my opinion, that's also a way to be able to stand out, but do so in a way that is guiding somebody to help them achieve the goal that they have.
100%. And I really want to go back to the point too about how I don't think anything should ever be arbitrary, and I think people
No.
should always have clarity, which I
Yeah.
think we miss a lot in healthcare. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, having the local presence I think is important, and I think in the same breath, I think it's also important to really, in terms of any leads you get, whether it's a local lead, whether it's someone that just finds you online that knows that you have some sort of remote services that maybe is not within your local realm, but it might be interested in working with you, that there's going to be, especially in this newer age of this model, there's going to be limitations.
Of course.
There's going to be people that maybe they're not ready right now. They're so used to, a family chiropractor, or, the PT they always go to,
Hmm.
and that's okay. And really coming to that realization that it's not going to be for everybody. But I think a lot of what I try to, prioritize, and you see it in my content, and you see it just in, the way that I try to speak to clients, is that there's a lot of people that maybe they're not ready initially, but they might, go try, what's, out there right now in the traditional sense. And then
Hmm.
they might come to that realization on their own that no, maybe this more comprehensive way of getting seen by a chiro, by a PT is maybe what I really need. So, and I think, going back to the point of not being arbitrary, I think that within, a free call that I offer, within just like an evaluation, like, it's important to show that to the person, because I think we
Sure.
lack a lot of that. I think a lot of people, they'll go, and I think that the most common kind of complaint that I'll hear from people that are in, most clinics that you see, marketed around the area, is that, like I said, the clarity. They don't really have clarity of where they're going, what direction they're going, and they also feel that, their plan or their rehab doesn't really match what they're trying to do. Like most people, the common thing that I hear is that, well, it seems like I was getting the same exercises as like everybody else in the clinic. Like my hip hurts, I got the hip protocol. My neck hurts, I'm doing the same exercises.
Mm.
I want to do triathlons. I'm getting the same exercises as the Medicare patient that's on the table next to me. Like this doesn't really feel like it's really matching my goals. And I think that is what I feel passionate about, because my approach really tries to take their goals into consideration. Can we, in rehab, can we recreate what you're trying to do in a way that it might look like the movement you're doing? We might break it down into the certain attributes that you need for the
Right.
movement. Whether it's a sport you're trying to get back to, whether it's just something functional, like getting in and out of a chair. Um, you know, how can we try to recreate that in your day-to-day life so that you're prepared for those things? Because we talk a lot about, in the medical world, about overuse injuries. And, in reality, a lot of people are they're just not doing enough. To me, it's like people who talk about, well, I would be, I really banged up my shoulder when I played football growing up, and I'm kind of, I'm not gonna be like I ever was in terms of like my athletic self. And they really just kind of blame it on their age, when really the issue is that they didn't. Life gets busy, right? And they just
It
didn't keep
does.
up with the demands that their body requires. And it doesn't mean you can't get that back. It might be a slower process in doing that, but people haven't really, they haven't, people who think they have gone through the proper rehab most likely haven't been challenged enough to create an adaptation, whether it's strength, whether it's power, whether it's endurance, um, to really try to give themselves a true shot at recreating what they're trying to do as a goal.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I hear this often. Again, I purposely surround myself with people who do have like more of what you're calling the hot takes, the perspectives that can challenge the traditional models and the norm. And one of my really close friends is a digital physical therapist and has a virtual practice. And something that she's really made herself known for is this idea that being in pain, it's simply a stimulus. It's a signal. It tells us something about the body. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to just give somebody this, RX of, well, don't move that. Like, just don't do that thing. And because most people don't have this information, you also can't blame the patient. Let's say I was in pain. My first thought may be, if I didn't have the fitness and nutrition knowledge that I do, my first thought might be like, okay, if my shoulder's bothering me when I go to the gym, I'm always going to avoid the shoulder press. That doesn't make sense, right? Because there's other aspects of my shoulder. My shoulder's connected to other parts of my body. So, like, what am I potentially limiting by not trying to work that muscle group? And second, and this is the clear parallel to fitness and nutrition to me, is there is more than one way to do something. There's more than one machine. There's more than one exercise we can implement. There are modifications that we can make, just as there is more than one method or approach with which we can use to lose body fat. Do I believe that tracking your food is a very powerful tool? 1,000%. But I think people have just lived in this place because of the internet. This is where like the virtual side can kind of bite us, right? That for something to go viral, it needs to be an extreme statement. So we become like really siloed and convinced that like there's only one way to do this thing and everything else is bad. And I would even blame that down to like looking at the way algorithms on certain social platforms work, the supposed tricks of like how to get attention, right? And how to get likes and how to get engagement is to make these statements that sometimes, if you look at what we call hooks on Instagram reels, people don't realize that people who are creating content that they want to do well are actually saying the exact opposite of what they mean until you read the caption. That's kind of dangerous if you think about it, right? Because if the person doesn't read the caption, well, then now we have no context. And then these things start to get circulated and it just becomes a mess of confusion that, again, goes back to the person being like, well, the safest thing for me to do is just to not move because then I won't actually feel the pain. And it's like, well, what's the consequence of doing that? A whole lot. But the biggest one is what you just said, not being able to get back to the things that you actually enjoy doing. And I think it's really important to acknowledge what you said about just recognizing that life gets busy and that's okay. And it's okay for that to be a reason to have potentially not achieved something or gotten back to something. But for some reason, and I'd love for you to react to this statement, like, I think like people have like called that so much of an excuse that like we think it's not enough of a justification for why we might be in pain, having gained weight, or whatever it is that we like are not liking about ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally. And like that's allowed to be a legitimate reason for something.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of people because of the, you mentioned before the conflicting messages. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so I honestly I feel bad for
Me too.
consumers and the layperson because you might go on Instagram and like you mentioned hooks and hot takes,
Mm-hmm.
there's the pages that have, hundreds of thousands of followers that are saying,
Right.
don't squat this way. And in
Right.
reality, that might be the way. Maybe it's heels elevated. I think that I saw a video one time that went viral that said like heels elevated squats are too much stress on your knees. Don't do it.
I
You
happen to
have
love the heels elevated squat because I want to work my quads and I tend to overwork my glutes and hamstrings from other positions, right? So, like, there you go. There,
It's
I
a
just
great
rebutted it.
modification.
Yeah.
It's an amazing
Especially if you
modification.
have tight hips, like, it could work
Yeah.
really well for you.
So to really make those black and white statements, people might go on Instagram and they're in pain and they might read three or four conflicting messages. And you're
Right.
right. What do they say? Well, I guess the easiest thing to do is just to not really risk anything because a lot of
Yeah.
people that they correlate pain with just tissue damage, that they're making
Hmm.
things worse.
Right.
And what I try to do I do a lot of analogies with my clients. So I think I try to say things that they'll relate to and
Yeah.
things that
We like analogies here. I love them. So
we love
have
analogies.
at it. Yeah.
Easy to absorb. And the one I like
Exactly.
to use for pain when I'm talking about pain versus just things being sensitive is
Hmm.
that if somebody's having more pain with an exercise or a movement activity, whatever it is, and obviously we've ruled out red flags, we're clinicians, at the end of the day, but really when we're trying to educate someone on, you know, we're not causing more harm, more tissue damage if they have pain, even a little bit of pain during a movement.
Hmm.
And I always try to give the analogy of imagine you have a paper cut and you pour vinegar on it. It's not worsening the paper cut, but it's
No,
gonna
just
feel like
stings a
shit.
little.
It's gonna
Yeah.
feel like shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's
It
gonna really
hurts.
piss it
Yeah.
off, but
Right.
nothing about the actual cut is getting worsened. So it's
Mm.
essentially the
That's a
same
very good
way
point. Yeah.
as really looking at pain as a whole. And there's different levels of pain. And this is something that I always try to educate my patients and clients on that, it's very subjective. So it's a process and it's something that you really have to cater to the person in front of you. If it's somebody that is coming in with chronic pain for 5 years and hasn't been able to really fully function in a healthy way for a long period of time, I'm probably not going to have that person push to like a 5, 6 out of 10 pain on the
Right.
first day. I want to get a win immediately. I want to get something that's completely in the green light. When it comes to someone who maybe we're just trying to, poke into things a little bit. I know that there's someone that maybe we've made some progress, we're plateauing, it's case by case dependent, but there are there are studies and there's data that shows that poking into a little bit of pain that is you feel the term I use is sore but safe.
Mhm.
We're sore, but we're okay to proceed as long as the symptoms aren't worsening during the movement. You don't feel like crap the day after that. And like we talked about before, it's just dose response. And
Sure.
to me, this is the critical thinking that goes into proper rehab. To be a clinician, to be a doctor that, we have a joke about it. It's like, oh, doc, it hurts when I do this. Okay, well, don't do that. Like the fact that it's a joke, but it's really what happens in
It
reality.
is. Yeah.
And
Like
it's
it
it's
sounds
sad to
funny to
say.
us because it's ridiculous.
Right. And the amount of times that people will come to me from, other practitioners that have gotten that message because it makes sense. It makes sense to offload the tissue. This is hurting me, so I'm gonna stop doing that because the movement is bad for me. When, like
Mhm.
we said before, there's so many different modifications. There's ways that we can adjust the weight, the range of motion, maybe even the tempo that you're doing things. And basically, you want to modify. You never eliminate unless you really have to, because there are some movements that it's like, hey, there's just not enough juice for the squeeze. Let's put this in the red light category. This is like a no go. And then hopefully, as we start rehabbing you, the red lights become yellow lights, the sore but safe, and then the yellow lights become green lights. That's the process. That's kind of the whole looking at things from a 30,000 foot view. This is kind of that spectrum that we're living on.
I totally agree with you. And I think like the biggest challenge for people is like we said, it's like you can't blame them for feeling confused between the info online, between what they may have gotten from the experiences they've had. And I think one other question that it would be cool to ask you, like as you kind of reflect on your journey and the experiences that you've had, if you go all the way back to when you worked in group fitness, right? And you think about what you just didn't know before going to chiropractic school, we do have a lot of people who listen to this show who participate in group fitness because that is my background as well. And I think like I've done episodes on this, but group fitness gets a bad rep for a lot of reasons, like similar to some of the things we've discussed. And not that we want to make any like sweeping generalization, since that's kind of the point of this is to say we can't do that. But is there anything that stands out at you that you're either like, oh my God, I can't believe that like we coach this way in my group fitness days when I didn't have the knowledge I do now, or maybe just like a consideration that you would give to somebody who really, really does want to work out in that group? Because I think it speaks to what we're just saying about how like ridiculous it is to be like, oh, don't do that if it's bothering you. There's so many benefits to group fitness, the community aspect, the motivation that comes with that, making friends there, the social environment of it, that I do find it disheartening for people when, from even a nutrition side, they've talked to a coach who's like, this is bad for your hormones and like you shouldn't do it. No, how about this? Like, we just get you to eat a little more, and maybe you don't go there 6 days a week, but we can settle on 4. And then we can come up with a way for this to fit into your life. I think about it more from like the energy and the nutrition and fuel side of things. So I love your take of how you might modify something, or, just a lesson that you kind of learned that you wish you knew back then that you could apply for that population of people.
Yeah, the tricky thing is that it's tough to modify
It
things in
is.
that population because they might not want to stand out in class. They might not want to like be that person. They might be a little embarrassed that,
Mhm.
their shoulders bothering them, so they
They
can't
sometimes
do
don't
all
even
the
say
CrossFit
anything
lifts.
to the
Exactly.
coach. Yeah, which
Right.
makes me sad because I'm like, tell me and I'll give you something totally different.
Exactly. And I think that's probably the biggest barrier in terms
Yeah.
of CrossFit, group fitness, whatever it is, in a group setting. And I think that that's probably number one. And you kind of alluded to it as well, where like a lot of things that there's times where I work with clients and it's not even really the specific rehab that I'm adding. Like it's
Mhm.
really not even things that I'm adding. It's more things like I'm just taking away in terms of not
Mm,
elimination, but in terms of just load management. So I
sure.
think there's ways to meet in the middle that you don't have to be like a practitioner that says CrossFit's bad for you. Don't do CrossFit. Do this
Yeah.
instead. Do my program. And there's times that maybe certain movements in CrossFit might be not worth it. We might have to modify that way. But I think a common misconception just within the health and fitness realm anyway, and I'm sure you can or, resonate with this as well in the nutrition realm, is that, a lot of people think that they need to be hitting the gym or a group fitness class 4 or 5, 6 days a week to even be making the minimum results.
Progress. Yeah. Hmm.
Like I work a pretty busy schedule between all of this, and
Yeah.
I have two, maybe three sessions of working out and runs a week.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm literally on that exact schedule right now, 2 days a week. It was even encouraged to me by the nutrition coach that I have for myself. Hey, because of the demands of your lifestyle and everything that has nothing to do with fitness, this is going to be more harm than good, at least for right now, because I'm not willing to give on the business side of things of what I want to pursue. I am okay if that means like, hey, I'm still getting my 2 workouts, but like the 2 workouts and plenty of walking, like cool. And if I could go back and like tell even a version of me 2 to 3 years ago, if not like 7 years ago, if I could tell her that, first of all, she would be like shocked that I'm agreeing with that statement today.
Mhm.
And that's what's cool about getting more information, more perspectives, growing knowledge, even just like doing the show and being able to have it as a reason to talk to more people like you. Right. But I think that's such a good point. And, I think it's important, like, for you to just even reiterate that again, to say that both of us as practitioners and like this is technically our life, right? Like anything related to health is literally our job, and we are not working out more than 3 times a week. And that's not to say that you can't, right? Like I have clients who do have that time, and not even just the time, but like they have the recovery capacity for it because they go to bed at 9 o'clock, and I just don't.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like it's person to person dependent. If somebody has the time flexibility, they have the proper amount of volume, they
Mhm.
just have the want to work out that many days a week because there might be the social aspect, then
Yeah,
that's all fine. I mean, not many people, especially when we start getting to, adulthood and, being busy professionals, like that's when a lot of these life stressors come into play as well. And
totally.
talking about how, with pain, things are very multifactorial, right? Things are not just related to the body part that is painful. There's other things that are going to be that vinegar for the paper cut, like
Yeah,
work stress, life stress, relationships, everything that's really involved in your life. And like you said, it's rare to see lack of sleep. It's rare to see the recoverability for most people to be able to handle all of that plus the 5, 6 days a week. They just don't have a big enough base to handle all that, right? So
yeah,
really our job is to either remove things from that, in a way that's they're not, it's not detrimental, like you shouldn't be doing these things at all, but it's like let's maybe just dose it in a way that's gonna help you recover better, whether it is
mhm,
workouts or anything like that, and just showing people that they can just get a lot more of the benefit, or at least the same
totally.
amount of benefit, with a lot less than they think. So that's really
Yeah.
sometimes it is just addition by subtraction and load management.
Yeah. And to your point of taking certain things away, so to speak, and looking at that volume too, something that I've come to realize is, and I've gotten back into group fitness for myself, like very recently. I hadn't done any kind of group fitness for almost 2 years prior to this. And it was because at the time, based on conversations that I had with a different nutrition coach I was working with, it was more like, hey, let's consider like experimenting with you really focusing on training by yourself so that we just have more control over load, the design of the workout, me like just kind of like also having some fun in the gym, like playing with different machines because I hadn't lifted like that in a few years. Cause like when you get into the group fitness scene, you also just out of convenience sometimes will like jump into a class, right? For the sake of you like still getting your workout in it. And I should say getting some movement in. So when I decided to jump back into a group fitness class as like a participant, I've actually realized, and the gym I go to is designed to, the main focus of the schedule is 2 days a week only because of the way the class structure is set up. And then there's options to work out on the weekends. But like for the most part, if you wanted to go 5 days a week, you could. But if I had to guess, the average person probably goes about 3. And I have to say that the biggest takeaway I've had from this, and I think something the listener would really need to hear to just keep things in perspective, I have so much more fun in my workouts, and I haven't called them fun in a really long time. And part of the reason for the fun is, yes, there's good music. There's people that have become my good friends. We get to connect. We get to hang out together while we're doing something that we both enjoy. But I just feel better in the way that I move because I'm not getting to like our workout set up in like 4 blocks and they're 10 minutes and it's mostly strength, but there's one that's conditioning. a past version of me that would have been trying to push 4 workouts a week on top of my work schedule would have gotten to the conditioning station and every single time be like, fuck, I'm so tired. Like, and just like pushing through this. That's not to say I don't work hard, but I actually feel stronger and feel like I have more capacity for that station because I stopped trying to overdo it, not with the workouts, but just like with burning the candle at both ends. And I think that's a necessary thing to hear because we tend to be so like, well, we got to get this goal. We want to achieve this thing, especially for my clients who are very type A and want to get it all done and are already getting lots of things done, that it's also okay to enjoy the process. And actually, you should enjoy the process too.
You need to. I work with a coach myself, and we have a monthly check-in, and I fill out a questionnaire on Google Forms. And one thing he always tries to check in with me is, what's your enjoyment in the rehab process? Like 0 to 5, like how would you rate your enjoyment? And he's told me anything less than a 5, like we're going to talk about it because this is like number one. There's so many things that you can change about fitness, and there's no black and white. Like you need to work out this way or else you're not going to get results. Like we can really make it. It's almost, to me, it's necessary to have fun during it, because if you're having fun during it, it's going to induce consistency, and you induce consistency, you're going to see the results that you want, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it looks like for you. You have to be having fun first.
Amen. Well, I know we also talked about being busy, so I want to honor your time and thank you for this conversation. I'm really excited for this to air, to get all the feedback from the FYX listeners. So I have one more question for you before you go, and that's really to bring this all home and kind of sum it up. We've obviously covered a range of topics today, but if you were to reflect on the last hour of this chat and somebody only had the capacity to take one piece of information away from it, what do you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could dive into, but I would say overarching, and I said this a couple times already, your rehab shouldn't be arbitrary. You should feel like when you're working with a provider that you've got the roadmap, you're being challenged enough, you can clearly see where you're going to get to your goal. And I think that's lost a lot in healthcare. So really, when it comes to all that, it's really just about finding a way to keep you in the game while you heal. We don't have to eliminate movements. We can modify the things that you love to do to eventually get you back there.
Love it. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate this. I have just so appreciated the process of us getting to know each other, learn more about you. Personally excited to continue to follow your content, see it evolve, and us just get to talk more about it and see the waves that you make in the space around the Jersey Shore. No pun intended, but that popped into my head. I was like, I got to do that. Yeah. So that said, where can everybody follow you? Because obviously I'm giving the Coach Krysta seal of approval on your content because it's really good.
The Jersey Shore, you gotta. Best way to find me is Instagram. I'm at Chiro by the Sea. And yeah, we can always chat about anything, health, fitness, rehab, or shoot me some memes. I'm a big meme guy.
Cool. Love it. Awesome. Well, Dane, thank you again. This has been a lot of fun, a really great conversation. And to everybody who tuned in today, you guys know the deal. Leave a review, or at the very least, please share this episode with somebody. Maybe you know someone who has been struggling along some part of their journey with pain management, feeling like they are expressing to you they can't do the things they want to do. Obviously, they should follow Dane, but there are a lot of great nuggets in this episode that will maybe put them in the headspace they need to revisit their approach and get back into it. So with that, from wherever you're listening from, we hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I will catch you guys next week. Thanks, Dane.
Thanks for having me.